Here we go. Kevin Chip coming to you from the Ascent Studio, located somewhere deep in the trees and vines of the southeastern United States, not even discoverable by Google Earth. This is the Off the Grid Living series that we're presenting here on the Patreon channel and then also on YouTube. And I have a special guest today. I want to introduce Michael Bunker. And before I bring him on, Michael Bunker, his book, Surviving Off the Grid, was the first survivalist book Sue, my wife, and I ever read when we were deciding to come off the grid and build a little off the grid community we have now on a little farm. So in some ways, many ways, Michael is kind of our mentor. The book is absolutely outstanding, full of wisdom, and I like it because it's faith-based too, and that's important to Sue and I. A brilliant book. So let me introduce everybody to Michael Bunker, author of Surviving Off the Grid and a few other books. Michael, welcome to the program.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. It's a great pleasure and honor.
Well, the honor is mine. This is one of those interviews that I absolutely am thrilled to do and enjoy. I want our listeners to get, and let me put your book up so people can see it, because I want people to go out and get this book. Because there's no surviving off the grid, decolonizing the industrial mind. I have read a plethora of off the grid survival books since then, but I have to tell everyone this is still one of the best books you can get if you want to look into living or surviving off the grid, just normally, or if what is probably going to happen at the very least an economic recession or worse is on the horizon. So in terms of books, Surviving Off the Grid, go out and buy it. And Michael, is this on Amazon? Can they get it there?
It is. It's pretty much anywhere where you can buy books. You should be able to find it, especially Amazon.
Beautiful. Everyone go get this book. As I mentioned earlier, this was the first book my wife Sue and I read when we decided that we were going to start moving off the grid. And it is a fantastic book. So go get it. So regarding your book, Michael, I want, since you are the master and I'm just the grasshopper, I want to start. You start about talking about the JIT system, the just-in-time system. Can you explain for our listeners what that is?
Yeah, I think most people don't realize, because things, kind of a ceteris paribus things always seem to be the way they've always been, which is not actually true, but people think that it is. And so they've always been able to run to the store and get things when they need them. And they may have an inkling of an idea that, you know, in a disaster or something, it may be harder, like it is now in China, to get toilet paper or paper towels.
Yeah.
But in reality, most people don't realize that there are really less than 3 days supply of food and supplies in our national delivery system. And kind of the most people say 3 days. That's completely false, because 3 days is if nobody knows anything's wrong. In 1998, we had a major power outage where I lived out in West Texas at the time. And there were fist fights in the grocery stores over water within about 6 hours, because there were enough rumors going around that other things were happening, that those things exacerbate the problem. And so they're just in time just means that, and it goes beyond just groceries and gasoline. Just in time basically is the idea that the system wants to be able to deliver goods and services just as you need them. It's the most efficient way for the system to work. However, for us, it makes us highly dependent on a system that is completely undependable. So, you know, merely the blocking of roads, any number of things can stop that system in its tracks. And then, of course, what happens is people panic.
And that's right. And their supplies that they depend on are no longer there. I can tell you, Sue and I live pretty close to Interstate 16, which is a big connecting corridor from Atlanta, Georgia to Savannah, which is a huge shipping port. Right. And we see these shipping cargo containers going up and down 16 all the time. Well, when the last hurricane hit, and it was projected to hit Savannah pretty hard, they closed Interstate 16. which stopped all of those sea vans from carrying their cargo to Walmart and all the other stores. And for 3 days, that just wasn't happening. So what we've seen, what you're saying, and that was just essentially a mild example compared to what could happen. But what you talk about in your book, the just-in-time system, probably one of the most important things people can get from what you wrote is you cannot depend on this system for survival, because you're talking just a few days at best, if things go down.
Yeah, at best, and that's like, again, it's assuming that people don't get the inkling that things are worse than they think that they are, because that multiplies everything.
That's right. And sadly, we know that even a neighbor or somebody in the community, a good person with a wife and kids, if things go down and there's no food or water, and that person doesn't have food or water for his kids, in about a week, maybe a little more in some cases, that person's going to become desperate. And some of these people are going to turn into, that's when you're going to see the looting. You're going to see people breaking into houses and stealing things. We've seen that in Venezuela. We saw it in South Africa. And just a side note, in Venezuela, the looters, when it started a few years ago even, the looters didn't go and loot the people in the city. They went out, broke down the doors, and killed the farmers, and took what the farmers had stored up, because obviously there's no law enforcement there. So just being out in the woods somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that there are not going to be people that are going to try to come in and take the things that you have. But point is, when people become desperate, and when they're hungry, and when they're starving, bad things can happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what happens is that just in time, that mindset, it's so much more pervasive, like I said, than just groceries and gas.
Mm-hmm.
We have just-in-time delivery of things like diabetes medicine. We have just-in-time delivery of electricity, water, all of these things, and most people have never even conceived of it. They've never, and even survival-minded people tend to still depend on the idea that there's going to be some respite or some period of time for them to be able to jump in and do the things that they need to do. And in a lot of cases, historically, that's not true at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great point. What you don't hear a lot about it in a lot of the books out there on prepping is the medical side of things, which you just said so well. What about the insulin? What about the medicine? What about people's prescriptions? What about all of that when that stops? What are they going to do to survive then? And those are the things that you don't find in a lot of prepper books, but they could result in life or death.
Right. Just in time is really a national motto. It's a national operating system. And what I use in the book, and what I do when I speak to people, is try to use that to convince them that the superstructure on which you've balanced and based everything that you think is insubstantive. There's nothing really there. You're basically built it on air. And that's the promise that your oatmeal is going to be there when you go to the store tomorrow, or whatever it is that you think you need. Sometimes if you can finally convince people that this system is really not substantive, then you can take the next step. And my book's really not about how to survive off grid. It's about how to think, because most people think incorrectly. Even survivalists think incorrectly. And so it's basically a process of teaching people how the system actually works and how to think about it. And that really changes everything. It changes the whole game.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things Sue and I got out of your book, is exactly that. It changes your whole way of thinking, changes your whole perspective. That's the beauty of your book, is what it does is completely rewires your thinking about this entire subject. And frankly, I got to tell you, Michael, I haven't seen any other book that does it like that. That starts with the paradigm and changes our paradigm regarding what this is all about. And then from there, you go on to the aspects of prepping after that. And that's why I think your book is so important. Now, you mentioned debt slavery in chapter 4. Talk about that a little bit, the debt slavery that people are in and how serious that is to people's survival.
Well, debt slavery is really just in time taken to kind of the nth degree, and that is that people have not only made an assumption about what goods and services are going to be available at the moment or over the next 3 days, but they've also borrowed against their own future, so that they're betting on 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now that they're going to be able to borrow that money, a- and uh, and because of that, and it's incremental. And so there's a great book I would recommend to people to read, that's called Henry and the Great Society. And if you ever want to read it's basically a fiction book, but it's not very fiction. What it does is it starts off with this guy, and it's probably around the 1950s. He lived his whole life off grid. He had family. They took a horse to town and traded eggs for their food and all this. And then one day, some people show up and they're like, "Wouldn't it be great to pave the road in front of us that passes in front of your house?" This is his neighbors, so that it'll be easier on the buggies. It'll be easier on the horses. So that's the beginning of it. They pave the road. And then the next step is, of course, cars start going down the road. So it's no longer safe for the horses. So he has to get rid of his horse. He ends up getting a car. I won't ruin it for you, but it's this long, slow roll downhill where the same thing happens with our electrical system, is that people say, "Oh, I'm going to have cheap and free electricity, but I'm just going to plug this one thing into it." And then pretty soon you have 9,000 things plugged into it, and your electric bill is $500 a month. Well, debt slavery is the same thing. You start off thinking that this is just a method, it's a financial management tool, and people don't realize sometimes by the time they're in their 20s or 30s that they are actually on a treadmill, and they are never ever going to get their head above water if they don't do something radical. And that what that forces them to do is it forces them to live in an economic and financial system that is unviable for them. It's never going to provide them what they want. And so a lot of this book is really, like I said, it's about how to think, but it's also about how to see that a lot of the things you've taken for granted, that you've accepted as maxims your whole life, are just not true. They're just
Yeah.
fundamentally not true. And so I tell the story about my grandmother and how basically she had lived this for most of her life, from when she was born, this kind of off-grid free life. Well, then they convinced her that she was poor. And the way you convince somebody that they're poor, starting in around the 1930s, is if you don't have electricity, if you don't have a flush toilet, if you don't have toothpaste that comes from the store, if you don't have ground flour that rises like the bakery's bread, then you're a poor person. In fact, we use that terminology. We say, "Oh, well, I didn't even have a flush toilet," and don't even realize that for thousands and thousands of years, really up until about the last 70 to 90 years, nobody did.
Right.
Nobody
Right.
did. The whole world went, when you see these wonderful pictures of Versailles and these people in these wonderful ball gowns and these big stately mansions, those people didn't have flush toilets either. You're not poor because you don't have a flush toilet.
Right. Right. Well, I can tell you this too. After 2 years of building, here on our off-the-grid farm, we have a composting toilet that's non-flushable, and we use peat moss to mix together, and we use it for soil on our non-vegetable flowers and plants, and we do just fine. And
Brilliant.
we're not polluting the environment. That stuff's not going down the drain into the system somewhere to some plant or a drain field that's going down into the water table and hitting everybody's wells, and it's
Right.
working beautifully.
It's wonderful. But that's just it's a symbol or an example of the maxims that people have just accepted.
Yeah.
If you don't have, one of the things we like to do out here is we would provide meals 100% from the land, 100% from stuff we grew. People don't realize that wealthy people in the early 1900s, late 1800s, ate things like charcuterie, sausages, wonderful cheeses, aged cheeses, and all these things. We consider these things to be artisanal. Actually, I misspoke. Poor people ate those things. What we consider to be poor people. I'm into Russian literature and Russian history and all this. And you
Yeah.
read Gogol and you read Turgenev. You have the peasants were sitting there eating these wonderful sausages and cheeses while the rich people in the house are eating boiled rabbits.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so our whole paradigm has been flipped upside down, and it's been done on purpose because
Yep.
the industrial system has wanted to sell this system of slavery because it works for them.
Yep. You're exactly right. The industrial system, you put it so well, has put people in, without question, what is a kind of slavery. And you probably know this. If you remember, after World War II, the very wealthy Germans who had a bunch of gold had no food to eat. And so what the wealthy Germans did is they went out to the quote unquote poor farmers and paid them in gold bullion for some of their produce so that they could eat. So the gold essentially was worthless. And the ones who were doing just fine were the poor farmers out there
Right.
subsisting by themselves. And you're right. What we have been deceived, our entire culture has been deceived by this industrial colonization that has deceived everybody into thinking that they have to live and be a slave and part of this system, which, if and when it breaks down, is going to leave them with nothing.
Completely subject. They're completely subject to the whims and caprices of the wildest people, the most violent people, or the
Yeah,
people who are the most likely to take what they want.
yeah,
And so, on the other hand, those people who are able to first educate themselves, make themselves aware of how they've been tricked. So, it's very easy, and people
yeah,
do this to decide, mentally decide you're going to go off grid and you're going to do these things, and maybe give yourself some convincing arguments for that. But again, if your mindset is wrong, then you end up starting off on the wrong foot, and you end up in the same. I know hundreds of people who have endeavored to go off grid, but have done so in such a way because they didn't educate themselves, in which they've ended up worse off than they
hmm
started. And so
that's
that's what.
good. It's a good point, and I got to tell you that my wife and I owe you, brother, because we started off with your book, and it
Right.
kept us from making a lot of mistakes that we would have made, and we've seen others make. So that change in paradigm is absolutely critical. Let's see. Let's talk about. You got so much good stuff in here. You're living off the grid, and you're really doing it doing it right. So do you have solar power there? How are you powering your I guess you have a farm there. How
Right.
are you doing that off the grid?
Our cottage and our farm and the way that we live is completely, I call it off grid or beyond off grid, meaning we don't have power, we don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting right now in my office, which is about 3 or 4 football fields from my cottage. I have a small solar power system that powers just enough to basically charge batteries on my laptop, to run the internet, charge my phone, and I use that for my business, for book writing, for publishing, for things like this, for interviews. But as far as when I turn this off and I walk up to the cottage for lunch, that's completely off grid. We don't have alternative power. We don't have solar power. We do use what I call the bunker principle, which is the first step is, of course, you learn how to do without. You learn how people did it for thousands of years without it. So we have a wood burning stove,
Mm-hmm.
and we have plenty of wood on our land. We can cook, we can boil water, we can do everything we need to do. But in addition, once you've learned to do that, then we got a propane stove.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as the system's up and running, we can buy propane. We don't want to heat up the house too much in the summer. So, and we're building a summer kitchen, but for now, we'll run propane if we have it. And then, so you can have these layers. The bunker principle is that you start off like the very first time we built our root cellar, we dug it by hand.
Mm.
And 4 feet down, we hit a layer of rock that was 6 inches thick. We busted through it with sledgehammers. We dug down 11 feet by 11 feet by 11 feet, and we built this root cellar by hand. Now, after that, I know how to do it. So when we dug our cistern, if I've got the money, if I've got the resources, we rented a backhoe and we dug it because I already know how to dig a hole, right? But you don't want to go out there into the land thinking I'm going to be off grid and I'm going to be this off grid master. And you use all these tools and all these things, and then something collapses later on, and you hit that layer of rock, and you go, "How do you do this? It's impossible." We would have people helping us, and they would say daily, "It's impossible." And I said, "Here's what I know: we are the offspring of people who survived for thousands of years without
Uh-huh.
electricity.
Right.
It is not impossible. We've just decided that it's impossible because it makes
Right.
it easier for us. So
Right.
up at our farm, we start everything that we do, whether it's baking bread. We've grown our own wheat from planting the seed by hand, harvesting it by hand, threshing it by hand, grinding it by hand, baking it by hand, making our own butter from our own cows, whole meals, top to bottom, beginning to end. And so that's how we live up there. I'm pointing up there, but that's how we live. And down here, I have a little bit of power so that I can communicate and write books.
That's great. You know, the background, I see Cafe Bustelo. I think that, you know, it's when you're talking about storing up food, what a lot of people forget is store up coffee, man.
Right. We
Not
also
only,
make our own coffee, though. We have
yeah.
mesquite trees out here,
Oh, do
and
you?
we make mesquite coffee
Oh,
and
beautiful.
have for about 15 years.
Beautiful. Well, that's going to be, you know, a bartering item. If things
People love it.
really do go down, you know, coffee's going to be a bartering of that one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I had a state police officer friend of mine who's now a dedicated Christian, was part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and he's now retired. Told me himself, he goes, you know, things are going to go down in terms of the economy and recession, and you know, there's going to be new currency, and of course, coffee is going to be one of those currencies. But ammunition was another one. He said, yeah, ammunition is going to be the new currency, not money. And then
Yep.
food, in the case of World War II in Germany, and people have got to start thinking outside the box and change their paradigm,
Absolutely.
which you've done in the book. All right, let's see. What do you think, as I'm going through your book here, what do you think is the most important topic? And there's a lot in here. That's why I want people to read it. But what do you think is the most important topic in your book at the time we have left that you want to talk about it and convey to our viewers and listeners?
The whole first maybe third of the book starts off with ancient Rome and ancient Greece,
Mm-hmm.
and it basically talks about the reality of the history of the world and how much we have been taught poorly, wrongly, lied to, and the most important thing about survival, and I'll mention two that's in this book. First of all, is to rid yourself of wrong ideas, bad information, historical lies that have taught you things that are functionally and absolutely not true. And the second thing is that of all the things and I'm all for storing things, I'm all for barter, I'm all for trade, I'm all for all types of utilizations. But the most valuable thing that you have is what you know, and to know it practically. So absolutely, it's one thing to store up some item and say I have enough coffee or I have enough, but the thing that is more valuable than that is to know how to make it or to know how to do it and to have done it for years. So my children were from the time they were 4 years old, were butchering animals, were learning how to grow things and all of these. And so, we had a year where things were very, very tight for us, and we weren't sure exactly what animals we might want to butcher because things were so tight. Do you butcher some of them or do you keep them? And a neighbor had just caught 9 pigs in his trap, in his pig trap. Out here, wild pigs are an
Mm-hmm.
absolute menace. Probably are where you are too.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought these 9 pigs over. He had shot them and brought them over, and my small children had those things butchered and put in the root cellar and stored and salted and put in the smokehouse within a couple of hours. That is the most
Great.
valuable thing you could know, is to know, because even if you lose everything, even if those bandits come by and they don't kill you and they take all your stuff, if you know how to do it, you can still survive.
Beautiful. So it's the knowledge that you get on how to do it, based on that paradigm change and based on kind of your new view of reality or worldview, that this is the system really is set up to fail for most people. And if, like you're
That's
saying,
right.
if you have the knowledge to survive without that system, and if the system goes down, or like you said, if they come in and take all your stuff, you've got what is priceless, and that's the knowledge to rebuild it all back again.
It evacuates fear. As long as with us and our family, our trust is in the Lord. We don't fear. We know things, and it gives you confidence. It also makes, those are barterable skills. They
Hmm.
have value to other people, and it allows you to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and you know, I know you're a person of faith, and that's one of the things we appreciated in your book. So am I. And you guys, it appears to me, and you can confirm this, but you guys live in peace. You got a very fulfilled, happy life. A good. You've got your faith. You don't fear what's coming. You're at home with yourself. Your kids are healthy. You're healthy. Your faith kind of drives, it actually drives the change in this paradigm you're talking about, which
That's
is
right.
one of the things I appreciate in the book, because it teaches people as they go through it the kind of the truth and the biblical truth behind all of this, and the faith and the freedom from this entire system. And it looks to me like you guys have got that. You've got that peace of mind, which people are trying to pay tens of thousands of psychiatrists to try to get. You guys got it, man, and you know you're not spending a cent for it.
That's right. Don't have to pay the psychiatrist. Don't have to pay the gym. We don't pay much to the grocer. So
That's yeah.
a lot of those things, they really do. They give you peace of mind, and the
Yeah.
Lord has blessed us mightily because of his good graces, and He's given us wisdom and understanding, which is all we can ask for.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I want everybody, all my viewers and listeners that are watching this, to read Michael's book, the things that we're talking about. I come from, sadly, Washington, D.C., and I work with people who are making six figures, who are some of the most mean, miserable, fearful people I'd ever met in my entire life. And I can tell you, I was making the same, and I was a fearful, miserable person until I broke from that system, came down to Florida, and then started our off the grid life. If you want peace of mind, if you want fulfillment, if you want real meaning in life, you start out with Michael's book, because he describes it so well. And I can tell you from what I've read and talking to Michael now, he's living it. So as I said at the beginning of the program, Michael, you are the master, and Sue and I are the grasshopper. So
Well,
we
we sure
started off with
appreciate
your
y'all.
book.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you guys too, and anybody out there who's putting forth their faith in this endeavor. We appreciate you and pray for you, and
Thank
hope
you,
everything
Michael.
goes well for you.
Thank you, Michael, very much, and I hope you'll come on with us again.
Anytime, man.
Fantastic. Everyone, this is Michael Bunker, author of Surviving Off the Grid. Let me put that up again so everybody can see it. You need to go out. There are some books you need to get. This is one of them. If you're even thinking about off the grid or surviving, or if you're kind of understanding what's coming down the road financially, go out and get this book. It's on Amazon.com. Sue and I've got it. I got it right here. We still refer to it. It is really edifying and really a brilliant piece of work. So, Michael, thanks for coming on and joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin. I sure appreciate it.
All
God
right, we'll see you
bless.
next time.
Bye bye.